historical festivals help to bring the past more vividly to life, here just as in Holašovice. Both the Rosenberg village and the Rosenberg town now use festivals and craft fairs to attract visitors, as well as to proudly assert their history and their identity. Perhaps Český Krumlov's only non-Renaissance museum honors Austrian 20th century expressionist painter Egon Schiele with permanent exhibitions. The town also boasts an international music festival that pulls in thousands of tourists. But the Five-Petal Rose Festival is what Český Krumlov is really about. It fills the town for 3 days with events in Renaissance costume, jousting nights and medieval music, under the sign of the Five-Petal Rose from, where else, the Rosenberg dynastic crest. The two successive branches of the family, first the Vitkovich clan of the Rosenbergs and then the side of the family carrying the Rosenberg name, ruled this area for centuries. It was the Rosenbergs who founded what is still the most important monastery in the region, Vyšší Brod, the Cistercian community that owned the entire village of Holašovice for almost 600 years. It is hard now for us to imagine how irreplaceable one family could seem. So powerful were the Rosenbergs that they twice imprisoned the Czech king right here in this castle, in the handful of years just before and just after 1400. Hardly any wonder they were sometimes referred to as the real lords of this land. The Rosenbergs Monastery, Vyšší Brod, contains most of their family tombs, with the exception of Wilhelm Rosenberg and his wife, buried in their mausoleum in St. Vitus Church back in Český Krumlov. This monastery was vital for helping to populate this remote and forested part of Bohemia. The village of Holašovice was one of these settlements only viable since the 13th century, and then only with the help of the Cistercians. The vital economic role monastic orders had in medieval times has been forgotten. Their crucial involvement in opening up regions of wilderness and settling unused badlands of Europe is something we struggle to imagine 500 years after the great abbeys, nunneries, and monastic estates started their decline. At the foot of the Samava Hills in the Blanska Woods is one of the villages this monastery sponsored, in fact, owned. Holašovice, a place which is still relatively cut off. Its isolation partly explains how it has kept its historical character intact. This small village is a strange place to arrive in. The buildings and the whole look of the town seem so new and beautifully maintained, it is hard not to believe that this place was built yesterday. Yet the style of those houses mixes 18th and 19th century ideas with older influences. The country around Holašovice has been inhabited since ancient times, but this exact point has only been settled since the medieval period because of the way the forest formed a boundary, limiting opportunities for sustainable agriculture and trade. Medieval towns and monasteries colonizing the region was what it took to open up this land. Local fisheries set up by the Rosenbergs, or Rosenbergs, as they are spelt in Czech, brought a large part of this development. The village probably officially came into being in the first half of the 13th century, but at the end of that century, in 1292, we have the first written mention of its existence. King Wenzel II, in a letter that year, grants ownership of Holašovice to a Cistercian monastery, Vyšší Brod. The village stays the property of the order until 1848. According to archival sources, the village has changed little since founding. 17 structures standing today can be seen in their original form. 2/5 of the buildings date from before 1827, and another 2/5 were raised between then and 1871. The village has 120 buildings. 23 of them are under the protection of historic monument status. The high gabled houses and grain stores are architecturally unified by their decorative stars, lozenges, leaves. Most of the structures are white, but there are often yellow and terracotta details. The exterior wall decorations created out of these simple repeated elements, applied with imagination and vigor, are what bind this village into a single entity. A frequently used motif is made of the letters I, H and S, spelling out the Latin phrase Jesus hominus salvator, or in English, Jesus, Saviour of mankind. This is often combined on the fronts of houses with the year of construction, and sometimes the monogram of the builder also. Unlike many other places, the open spaces of the village, such as the main central square, have not been built up. The square is bordered on all four sides by buildings marked on their gable ends with these emblems, crests or monograms. In 1755, on the northern side, the Baroque Chapel of St. János Nepomuki was erected, the stone cross being added in 1935. Some areas of land and buildings have been converted for other uses, such as small gardens. And with post-war collectivization of agriculture, some lost their original form, while others carried on being used as they always had been. Unlike many settlements, principally constructed out of wood until the start of the 19th century, Holašovice was from the start largely a village built of stone. With the ending of serfdom and the coming of prosperity to the peasant class, a style began to spread expressing a new sense of confidence and well-being, sometimes called peasant Baroque. And some of the best examples of this style are what we can see here. It's striking to compare peasant Baroque and high Baroque decoration. In many ways, the later, poorer and more minimal decoration of newly emancipated peasants is more to 20th or 21st century taste than the playful opulence of high Baroque. It can be hard to see what they have in common, but if we imagine that the 18th and 19th century villagers of Holašovice had had more time, more money, better materials, we might have been surprised to see what they would have done with it. The village would now look more like Český Krumlov than most modernists and enthusiasts for folk vernacular would care to imagine. Stripped down to basics it might be, but this is still Baroque. The role of Freemasons in spreading architectural ideas across Europe as part of this hidden link between high and low Baroque. Freemasons knew not just the theory and practice of building in cities and for noblemen, but also introduced and blended folk art with themes from the Renaissance to Classicism in the formal elements of decoration and construction. These builders did not stray far from traditional themes and materials, balancing folk art with gestures from high architecture. The result is this uniquely cheerful and playful blend of balanced buildings, individual, yet also part of their group. This distinctive style can be continued. This is what kept newer buildings in harmony with the older, authentic and in tune with the whole. As a result, 90% of the village is considered historic monument standard. Most buildings are still lived in. Only 2 are only used as summer houses. Around 140 people live here, and most cottages are privately owned. The one-time tavern is now a restaurant. There is another business operating out of the former smith's house, and the smithy itself is used by the fire station. The former community church is an information centre now. One house is now an ethnographic museum displaying a range of old items and tools. Horse-related to home utensils and agricultural tools can also be seen here. Growing tourism is leading to the setting up of a small hotel at one property. Yet, everyone here appreciates that protecting the historical and architectural authenticity of the village is in their interest. Regular meetings, free technical advice and some state assistance for monument protection and upkeep are all part of why the villagers understand the importance of keeping Holašovice in its current pristine state. This helps motivate the great local interest in village festivals with their rich program of folk art and market sale events. In 1998, UNESCO designated the whole of the village as part of the world's cultural heritage. The essence of protecting Holašovice is to keep alive for future generations the manual skills and folk arts that made it. But both Holašovice and Český Krumlov, even as lovingly maintained lived-in monuments, are still isolated fragments from a puzzling past. The age of landowning monasteries, an aristocratic family that could take a king hostage, Christian belief that penetrated every social class and every part of life, has vanished. We can easily fail to see the connecting fabric of an era in which a town and a village that seemed to us so different belonged together.